Diary of a Man in Despair. Friedrich Reck. September 1938.
Homeward bound from Berlin, which I found nervous and already a little more constrained as the Czech crisis continues, I saw from my sleeper window in the Upper Palatinate endless trains loaded with artillery and munitions rolling towards the border. Germany, by which I mean this latest generation, carefully nurtured in the precepts of highway robbery, is indeed in a most unusual state of mind today. It regards the will of this so-called Führer as a kind of cosmic law, and all opponents, even those outside the Reich's borders, as criminals. Yes, of course, a foreign nation is involved, and there is the little matter of broken treaties, but then the Führer has willed it so. And what if the others were finally to take courage in hand and say no to this Führer grown drunk on the success of his political burglaries? It could be that the shock of learning that he is not, as he has gradually come to believe, the center of the world, would be enough. That moment when, for the first time, he does not get his way, he might well simply disappear from the stage. But everything indicates that Europe will look on and do nothing, this time as in the attack on Austria. And so Hitler's position will be further strengthened. These are the lengths to which we have been driven, that we, who are not the worst of the Germans, must now put our hopes in a war to free us as of a plague of locusts. I had a long discussion on the subject with P., who cannot comprehend why I feel this way. Of course, he is a businessman, and it has long been a theory of mine that the basic substance of nationalism is of a commercial nature. Besides, it depends on whether or not one recognizes this regime, born in chicanery, blackmail, and swindle, as a legitimate government. I have, since January 30, 1933, never ceased to view it as criminal in nature, and as a fraudulent counterfeit of a modern state. If, then, a gang of thieves breaks into my house, and attacks and beats me, shall I then complain about the police who come to my rescue and break down the barricaded door? I can now prove that the plebiscite to legitimize Hitler's takeover of Austria was falsified in the crudest possible way. Together with the other 4 adults of my house, I naturally voted no. In addition, I know of at least 20 other reliable people in the town who did the same. Nevertheless, according to the official results, the town unanimously and without a single dissenting voice, approved the actions of the Führer. The air is full of rumors about plots and assassinations centering, oddly enough, about the Praetorian Guard of the SS, and the so-called Knights of the Teutonic Order, mainly druggists' assistants and mail clerks. And this is what happened to me in Munich recently. As I was shaving in the little hotel near the main station where I ordinarily stay, something dropped past my 3rd-story window, and then there was the sound of a heavy thud. When I left the hotel, a man was lying in the street, legs spread wide, skull cracked, and brains in a pool of blood on the pavement. He wore black riding pants and a gray and white striped pajama jacket. Bystanders stood about, gawking, and an excited bicyclist was telling how he had been nearly hit by the body plummeting from the 4th floor. A noisy woman had actually seen the man climb onto the window ledge just before he jumped. A hotel porter covered the corpse with a heap of paper while 2 street cleaners swept up the blood and brains. Then came a sanitation truck, a hose was connected to the nearest hydrant, and the pavement was hosed clean as the corpse lay alongside, boots protruding beyond the covering paper. The corpse remained in the now closed-off side street, its outspread legs coming into view whenever the wind lifted the brown hill of paper. When I questioned the porter, he told me that the man had appeared at the hotel that morning at 6 o'clock, in SS uniform and slightly drunk, and had asked for a room on the uppermost floor available. He then ordered a liter of beer and a whole bottle of cognac, the remains of which we then found, the cognac 3/4 gone, in the bare little attic room alongside the disordered bed. On the floor also lay the man's black jacket, and strewn on the bed, a crumpled collection of the kind of postcards which are sold to the tourist on the Praça do Comércio in Lisbon, and above all in Port Said. The results of the preliminary police investigation emerged several hours later. The dead man, who had registered, naturally, under a false name, had been trained in the school at Bad Tolls for SS officers. He had been involved in a conspiracy against Hitler and the Nazis, and was being hunted. The incident in all its unpleasantness and its still more unpleasant corpse reminded me of a story that my friend Hans von Bülow, nephew of the great general, told me years ago. In 1918, during the Finnish campaign, a former Prussian officer was captured who had become the chieftain of a band of Bolsheviks. This man had spent years in a Russian prisoner of war camp, and this experience and his life during the revolution had turned him entirely into a marauder. Before the war, the man had been promoted from the ranks, and from 1912 he had been given the privileges of an officer. Now this man, who had been completely brutalized by 4 years in a Siberian prison camp and had degenerated into a bearded, bloody killer, was condemned to death as the leader of a gang which had committed endless crimes. But this is what is so incredible: as he stood before the firing squad, looking into the black eyes of the muzzles directed on him, he asked for a cigarette. He lit the cigarette, took a puff or two, and then in the instant before the command was given to fire ripped down his pants, whirled about giving death his blank behind, dropped a pile on the ground, and received the sacrament and the bullets simultaneously, as he continued to defecate. I talked to Bülow again about that old story. At first glance, there was a passing resemblance to Chopin, who cried into the face of death as it came down upon him, "Murd." There was also a temptation to admire this present generation for its disdain of death. But here a man would be wrong. What appears here to be courage in the face of death is merely massman apathy. What appears to be stoicism is merely the expression of the condition of massman, neither good nor bad, but basically and with a certain satisfaction at being so, nothing. I really do not know how to characterize the spiritual condition of my dreary contemporaries better than that. Today, rumors are circulating of an uprising which has flared in Vienna. I do not believe that there is any real basis to it. Most likely, the story derives from the gossip and trotting about of a few market women, and that's about all. Massman moves, robot-like, from digestion to sleeping with his peroxide blonde females, and produces children to keep the termite heap in continued operation. He repeats word for word the incantations of the great Manitou, denounces or is denounced, dies or is made to die, and so goes on vegetating. And there is not even a blush when he is confronted by the legacy of his fathers, by the monuments of a noble past, by the crowning achievements of his own culture. But even this, the overrunning of the world with Neanderthals, is not what is unbearable. What is unbearable is that this horde of Neanderthals demands of the few full human beings who are left that they also shall kindly turn into cavemen, and then threatens them with physical extinction if they refuse. We read in Heraclitus,
"They no longer know that the many are always the evil and the few, the good." The Ephesians go so far as to force all the aged to hang themselves and leave the city to the youth. They have hunted Hermodor, who was the foremost among them, from the city with the cry, "No one shall be called most virtuous amongst us, let him be so elsewhere and amongst others."